Let's dive into today's show. I might have escaped the trains in Connecticut, but I have not escaped NFL hype trains from the offseason. Yes, I had to work that in there, Ian Hartitz. Today we're going to talk hype trains, and we know that the offseason is the perfect time for that. Players who either perform great or didn't perform great last season, somehow in these months that we have off, get propelled into stardom. So we're going to go through 6 names today. Each of us are going to nominate 2. Either will be on the hype train, off of it, still uncertain. Kind of just had a conversation on each of those names. Ian Hartitz, why don't you kick us off today?
So I'm continuing to stay on the hype train. I may have invented this past January, and that is the Calvin Ridley wide receiver 1 hype train. And look, I've seen this come up a lot more recently for some reason because it's June, and I think us fantasy analysts just kind of pick a different player to bark about every day. But, just some of the issues with Ridley, I think we need to address. Like, okay, he's the number 2 wide receiver on his own team. And everyone says, why don't you take your DJ Charks and these number 1 options, number 1 wide receivers a little more seriously? But, we have to look league-wide and realize that just because you're a number 1 wide receiver, it doesn't even mean you're your team's number 1 pass game option. A lot of teams have multiple wide receivers fighting for that job, like the Rams. Other teams have, a tight end 1 or even an RB 1 that's taken that. I just went through the rosters. I think there's about 16, give or take, wide receivers that are locked in as their team's number 1 pass game option. So it's not like we have 32 wide receivers that we need to assume are getting more volume than Calvin Ridley. Realistically, his volume should kind of be in that top 15, 20, 25 worst case range. And, once you also include, hey, this guy just averaged 17.5 PPR points per game when Mohamed Sanu was gone. They didn't replace Sanu with anyone. We still just have Russell Gage there. I like Hayden Hurst. You guys like Hayden Hurst, but come on. Ridley is cemented as the number 2 option in a very good passing game that's going to have to throw the ball again because it didn't fix their defense. And the only complaint I can see, which Hayden, I saw you made a good point on Twitter about this, is Ridley's, yards after the catch isn't amazing, but I've always somewhat wondered, is that more of a skill stat or a little bit of a scheme stat? What kind of targets are you getting? And again, if that's the only question, the guy's missed 3 games over 2 years. Whenever he's gotten at least 8 targets, he's going for 7 catches and over 100 yards. Even though people are digging into this Ridley more and, maybe Chris Godwin is the overall better player, I still think we need to treat Ridley as anyone's idea of a top, 15, 16 wide receiver this year.
Yeah, for me, he's my wide receiver 10. Just the opportunity meets talent. Falcons led the NFL in pass attempts last year. They had the highest pass rate in the NFL. They were top 4 in pass rate while trailing and leading last year. They also have the most available targets. And then just going back from 2019 all the way to 2014, this is where the Falcons wide receivers ranked as a team. They were in 2nd in fantasy points, 2nd, 7th, 3rd, 8th, and 1st. So this team's just been loaded at receiver for a while. I don't see how he's not going to be like a borderline wide receiver 1 every week.
Wow. And I think the note that you just made is the important one because he's right now in drafts. He's going somewhere around the wide receiver 16. You have him as the wide receiver 10, you mentioned, Hayden. I guess the only discussion and conversation here is just how early you're willing to draft him to make sure he lands on your team, because there are so many talented receivers. We talked about this on the last episode with Pat. So many talented receivers in that top 12, top 16 wide receiver group. So Hayden and Ian, let me turn this back on you. Are you willing to take him over a Juju Smith-Schuster? Are you willing to take him over an Allen Robinson? Are you willing to take him over an Odell Beckham, a DJ Moore, right? That's where this conversation starts. Because if we could get him, all 3 of us, at wide receiver 16 in every single draft, boom, he's on our fantasy roster. But if you have to reach just a little bit to guarantee yourself that player, then I think that's when, it gets really interesting for fantasy teams.
Yeah, and look, I'm not trying to jump and get Ridley just because I want him that badly in the 2nd round. But if you get your RB star, like we've kind of been talking up, I'm coming more around to the idea as we do these drafts more that, you don't really, get your two top 20 RBs. Don't really mess around with that next range, and then go get your stud receiver in round 3. Basically, people should not be sad or afraid or anything if Calvin Ridley is the first wide receiver you're drafting this year.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I like the RB start. And then basically from wide receiver 6 to about wide receiver 16, all those guys are pretty close, but that's the names you just listed, the Juju Smiths, Allen Robinson. Calvin Ridley is right in the middle of that. But the one thing is depending on what site you're drafting from, Calvin Ridley's like kind of like ranked like around like wide receiver 18, 19 on some of these consensus boards on like, I think it was like on Yahoo I was drafting. So I've been drafting guys I have ranked lower than Ridley earlier, someone like DJ Moore, and then getting Ridley in the 4th round. So that's something I've been really excited to do.
Nice. That's something that's always in our draft guide and season pass is, taking advantage of the simple rankings, the draft room rankings on teams' sites or on different sites. So absolutely, Calvin Ridley is a name to keep in there. Okay, let's move on. I'll go next. We've talked about this name as well this offseason. Right now he's being drafted as the wide receiver 44, 121 overall. His name is Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman, a 2nd-round pick, I think above pick number 61 last year, 41 targets, 26 receptions, 538 yards, and 6 touchdowns as a rookie. At this draft slot, this is where I want to start this conversation. At his draft slot, again, as the wide receiver 44, he's either your wide receiver 4, maybe your wide receiver 5. And at that spot, I really want to really bank on upside. I want to try for upside. If he fails, if he doesn't get the opportunity that we hope he gets, then you can find those target types during the season. Your Zach Pascals, your Cole Beasleys, whoever else. But my question to you, Ian, is this. Travis Kelce, 136 targets last year. Sammy Watkins, 90 targets. Demarcus Robinson, 55 targets. Then Mecole Hardman, 41 targets. He still scored 6 touchdowns, but who is going to give up the targets this season in order for Mecole Hardman to have really fantasy value each and every week? We're talking season long here. That's the one question I have with if he can make good on all this hype he's getting this offseason.
And that's kind of the problem. I mean, you look at the playoff stretch and he just wasn't able to find the field. And, we gave Sammy Watkins all kind of crap for his performance throughout most of last regular season. But the guy over these last playoff games, similar to Damian Williams, he looks like a replaceable guy in the regular season. You put him in the playoffs, starts making plays. So it wouldn't be shocking if week 1 comes around and Mecole is out of 3 wide receiver sets. I will say he's kind of got that like Josh Reynolds-esque role where it's not like we need Tyreek to get hurt. Like we could have Tyreek, Sammy, or Demarcus Robinson get hurt, and Mecole is going to slide right into that, starting number 3 role. I don't know how many targets are going to be there, but I mean, literally the most efficient rookie ever in yards per target, when the stat got invented in 1992, it's Mecole Hardman. And yeah, some of that is lack of opportunity, but truly this guy is Tyreek Hill light. I mean, we kind of scoffed at the comparison when they drafted him because just another, shorter, fast guy. And how can you compare a rookie to Tyreek Hill? But literally, we're talking about the only 2 guys over the last 2 seasons with at least 6 touchdowns of 30-plus yards. The guy just breathes big plays. They're going to find a way to get his touches. And I'm with you, Josh. Like, if this was like a top 30 pick, maybe we could have more questions. But as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, go get that upside.
Yeah, his biggest thing is just getting on the field. When Tyreek Hill was healthy last year, his highest routes run in a game was only 21. I mean, usually you see that like 35, 40 for full-time starters. So he has to pass up at least Demarcus Robinson, which is pretty doable. I mean, Demarcus Robinson's fast, but he's not like quite as explosive as Mecole Hardman is. And we got to remember, this is Mecole Hardman's like 3rd or 4th season ever playing wide receiver. He was a cornerback at Georgia at the beginning of his career. So we should expect him to only get better. I don't think we'll ever see him as like a consistent wide receiver 3 as long as Tyreek and Travis Kelce are healthy. But I mean, every single week we're looking like when week 5, week 6 rolls around, we're looking at just like an upside flex. And yeah, Mecole Hardman's upside is going to be way higher than the other guys that you're going to be trotting out there. So to have him at the end of your bench, why not?
And these are the names of wide receivers going around him. Again, wide receiver 44, depending on where you're looking at ADP. Darius Slayton is wide receiver 40. After him, CeeDee Lamb. Jamison Crowder talk about target volume. Jerry Jeudy in there as well. After him, Emmanuel Sanders, John Brown, Mike Williams. Henry Ruggs is an interesting example, right? Or an interesting name to bring up because, both are hyper explosive. Both have that big play upside at all times. But how it sits right now, it would be shocking if Mecole Hardman is the one that sees more targets over the likes of Henry Ruggs. Because we talk about, targets left on the table all the time this offseason. There are no targets left on the table for the Chiefs this offseason, right? Like all the players are basically returning. Now, the difference in Henry Ruggs and Mecole Hardman is one, probably the pecking order at wide receiver, but one's attached to Derek Carr and one's attached to Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And most likely, if we're talking about wide receiver 4s, wide receiver 5s, I want the one in potentially the best offense in the NFL, with the best quarterback in the NFL, and the best play caller in the NFL. Call me crazy.
As you always say, Josh, just draft good players. Doesn't have to be this hard, right?
Just draft good players on winning teams. Why not?
There we go.
Go straight to your title. Okay, so there's 2 names down. Hayden Winks, give us the third name.
I am all the way in on Tyler Higbee, the Rams tight end. And everyone knows the stats. In the last 5 weeks, he averaged 21.2 PPR points per game, 11.2 targets per game. That led the position the last 5 weeks. But what's crazy about that is he's still a positive touchdown regression candidate. He only had 3 touchdowns last year. My expected receiving touchdowns model had him at 6.1, so we should expect his touchdowns to increase next year. And the one thing about the Rams offense is if they're good, these guys are going to be putting up points. That means they're scoring points in general. And if they're bad, at least the Rams run at the fastest rate in the NFL when they're trailing, and they pass the ball more than any team in the league when they're trailing. So if the Rams are good, Tyler Higbee's scoring touchdowns. If the Rams are bad, then he's going to get the volume. So we've seen the ceiling, and not many tight ends have shown elite tight end production. So that's why I like Tyler Higbee out of that. After the tight end 4 guys, there's like that mix of like Evan Ingram and Darren Waller. I like Higbee the best out of that group.
Yeah, I like that call, Hayden. And, sometimes it's scary to get behind these dudes that really didn't do much throughout their career, and they have some random 5-6 game stretch in the end of the season where they're just balling out. You got to be careful. Why were they playing so well? Is this even going to transition to next year? But I think we can be confident that Rams offense we saw after their bye week is what we're going to see moving forward. I mean, Sean McVay has talked about wanting to, use more personnel, change the game plan week to week, be more like the Patriots. I mean, they were the league's most 3 wide receiver heavy team before their bye last year, and they slipped down to 11th afterwards. And that was with Gerald Everett, the number 2 tight end, banged up. So I think moving forward, we have to assume Higbee's going to be our starting tight end. Woods and Kupp are at the wide receivers. But I don't know that any one of Everett, Reynolds, Van Jefferson, I think we're just going to kind of see a rotation in more different formations than usual. I mean, good news is Higbee has been identified seemingly as one of the top guys because, again, that's what he was in the new look Rams offense we're talking about. But, whether or not he can even if he doesn't need to get those same Gronk-esque heights, we know he can get there. That's fantastic. But even, a moderate slip in that type of usage, I mean, he doesn't need 11 targets per game. He can have 8 targets per game, get that touchdown progression, positive regression Hayden was talking about, and we're still talking good.
I'm so curious about this dynamic of the LA Rams this season, because they go from a team for years that ran 11 personnel 90+% of the time to now this offseason getting rid of Wade Phillips. Sean McVay's helping bring in an offensive coordinator, even if he's still going to call plays. And they want to change things week to week far more often. But it's kind of somewhat of an unknown what that week to week is. We did see that parts of the time last year, but so much 2 tight end sets are going to be talked about, not just with the Rams, but, across the league. Well, the Rams are going to run 12 personnel 90-something% of the time like they did with 3 wide receivers a couple of years ago, right? But that's not something we necessarily have to worry about, because if they're still going to go with a single tight end on the field, almost assuredly that is going to be Tyler Higbee. My only thought and hesitation with investing in Tyler Higbee is just that middle tight end group, right? Like if I don't get your George Kittles, if I don't get your Travis Kelce's, I still have a soft spot for Evan Ingram, call me crazy. But if I miss on that, and Ian, we've talked about this a lot, if I'm missing that, then, I would love to wait for your Hayden Hurst, your Jared Cooks, your Noah Fant, so on and so forth, and those names, rather than pass up a great wide receiver talent that might be on the board to not feel great about my tight end selection.
That's the only negative about Higbee. He is kind of being priced near his ceiling. And that's what's interesting, guys. This isn't exactly a Jared Goff fan-friendly podcast here, but, I took the ADPs of every team's running back, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, tight end 1, and then took the quarterbacks, pretty much see who are these late-round quarterbacks that have really high expected, projected skill position guys. And we kind of pinpointed Teddy Bridgewater as that throughout this offseason. Goff, though, actually had the biggest difference. And you look at that Higbee explosion at the end of the year, Goff was like the QB5 during that stretch, multiple touchdowns, averaging over 300 yards per game. I know it's not pretty, but I mean, as bad as that Rams offense kind of was relative to our expectations last year, still a top 12 scoring unit. And as Hayden says, I mean, they're going to be throwing the ball around a lot, probably regardless of if they're able to, get better or worse on the scoreboard.
Yeah, as long as Jared Goff just like absolutely does not suck this year, which, that could be a big if, because they didn't try to improve that offensive line at all, even though it showed kind of what a dumpster fire the offense can be when they allow disruption and pressure. I'm not going to say everyone can be values on that offense, because Cooper Kupp is still going as a wide receiver 15 ahead of Calvin Ridley, who we mentioned. Robert Woods, who I would want to invest in, is wide receiver 18. That running back, that backfield, we have no clue how that is going to shake out. But I mean, we've seen Sean McVay for years work his magic. And yes, that was an ideal situation behind that offensive line. I just kind of think like that Rams offense has been forgotten about this offseason. Like we're hyping up the Cardinals, obviously. We're hyping up the Rams, or excuse me, the Cardinals, the 49ers, the Seahawks. Like this is a team that has still put out one of the best offenses in the last few years. They could easily do that again in 2020.
Yeah, they're at least getting the volume, and you can't say that about other teams. I mean, when you lead the league in passing rate when you're trailing and in offensive pace while you're trailing, your floor is just so much higher because you're at least going to get on the field.
By the way, I was checking the draft guide, which you all can find on Stands. The two people who have Tyler Higbee the highest of all of us are on this podcast. That is Hayden Winks, and that is Ian Hartitz. There you go. You two, the two young guns. All right. First three names of the hype train: Calvin Ridley, Mecole Hardman, and Tyler Higbee. Let's go for round two. Ian Hartitz, you're up.
All right. I'm off the Buccaneers in general. And it's kind of mostly for the reason that I just said with Higbee. It's everyone is being priced in like a best case scenario at their ceiling right now. Brady, like I'm looking at best ball ADPs, because I know it's different than redraft, but we just don't have as much information right now from redraft ADP. So Brady's going as a QB 9. Godwin's the wide receiver 6. Evans is the wide receiver 8. Gronk's the tight end 9. Rojo and Keyshawn are okay enough values in the RB 30 range. But like, guys, we just learned last year when we talked ourselves into Godwin, Evans, and OJ Howard, how hard it can be for any offense to have 3 high-end dudes. And we're in the same offense with a different quarterback. We're now projecting 3 receivers to, again, be top 12 scoring people at their position. I get it. TB12's the GOAT. Edelman and Snu were banged up last year, but I mean, we still saw like 5 of his last 7 efforts where Brady just really couldn't move the ball down the field. And again, I think he's better than that, and upgrading the weapons and everything, it's going to help. But I mean, 43-year-old Brady, we need him to just continue to not be affected by anything for them to put up these types of numbers that we're projecting. I mean, it took Jameis league-high pass attempts. It took him to be the, passing leader, because we judged that by total passing yards, which is kind of hysterical. And, we're already hearing from Bruce Arians about, being more willing to check down, utilizing more 2 tight end heavy personnel. It's, I don't think the Buccaneers are going to be bad. I think they're going to be fighting for the playoffs, maybe even making the playoffs. But I'm just not really buying that they're going to be this locked in top 5 offense like we're projecting them to be.
Yeah, it's simply the price tags. We know Mike Evans is good. Chris Godwin's really good. Gronk's obviously really good. The Buccaneers running back situation is very odd. I think Ronald Jones is now ahead of Keyshawn Vaughn in ADP after that flip-flopped a while ago. But I'm just completely out on both of them. I think both of them are just average talents. And over the last 3 years, the Buccaneers running backs have averaged the lowest amount of PPR points in the league. And we're not even including Dare Ogunbowale into the mix here, who could be the third down back just because he's such a good pass blocker. I don't want either of the running backs. Maybe Gronk if I've missed out on the other guys, and then Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. There's so many guys in that range, like the Adam Thielens, Allen Robinsons, for me, Calvin Ridley, that I'm not really just going out on a limb and reaching for those guys either.
Call me crazy, guys. Like I want Tom Brady as my quarterback this year. I do. And I might, it might not work out, but we've also seen if it doesn't work out and there's not enough volume, then I can easily pivot over to someone else at the quarterback position. But right now he's going as the quarterback 10. We have this like awful image in our head from a production angle of what Tom Brady did last year. He only recorded 27 total touchdowns, right? 24 passing, 3 rushing. I bet he gets to that 32 mark this year. I mean, 27 is the lowest touchdown rate he had since the 2013 season. Now he has probably the best weapons he's had since, peak Rob Gronkowski. Before that, like peak Randy Moss, right? Mike Evans, every single year he's played in the NFL, he's had at least 1,000 yards. Let this season, when now he has a quarterback who is probably the best of all time, and I understand he's definitely on the wrong side of 40, we don't think he's going to get it. Like, I absolutely think Mike Evans is going to get it. And I understand that, it's not necessarily a hype train for these individual players because they've already met theirs and found theirs and hit them. Chris Godwin was certainly a hit last year on that. But these are extremely stable talents with Tom Brady throwing the football to him that to me is just going to scream efficiency this year. And the volume might not be there, but the efficiency I think absolutely will be.
Yeah, I just feel like when all right, you're kind of talking me into this because there's not – like you're talking me into myself, Josh, because I don't think Brady has any sort of ceiling. Like we talk about not wanting these just like why take Brady when you can get Jared Goff, who we know is going to throw the ball more like 6 QBs later. Like we just don't. Gosh. There's no rushing floor. Brady is a million times better in real life than Jared Goff. I'm not trying to disagree with that, but I don't know, man. To spend a top 10 QB pick on Brady, get out a year early, not a year too late.
Let's act like we're in a fantasy draft right now, okay? And obviously a number of names we're not going to take Tom Brady ahead of, like your Lamar Jacksons, Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray's, Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, probably not even a Josh Allen either. I'm going to take Carson Wentz ahead of Tom Brady as well. But like, let's say we're on the board, Hayden and Ian, and Tom Brady's up there and Aaron Rodgers is up there. Tom Brady is up there. Matthew Stafford is up there. Daniel Jones. I'm siding with Tom Brady in those situations. I think his situation is so much better. And I understand that probably they aren't going to be trailing. And I think there's a little bit of a hype train for the Buccaneers defense thinking it's going to be that much better than it was last year. So this team's not going to be in negative game scripts at all. Yeah, I'm buying into Tom Brady. Maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid and I'm excited to see him not on the Patriots or in a Patriots jersey. But I'm cool with leaving drafts with him as my quarterback.
Yeah, out of that list, the only guy that I would be drafting over Tom Brady is Matthew Stafford. Just the ceiling seems so much higher. We saw what he did through the first 8 weeks. But yeah, I think Tom Brady's going to throw for 30, 32 touchdowns. They'll win 9 or 10 games, and he'll be like the QB 10. I don't know if we're going to get much upside beyond that, but I think he's an all right value there.
It's not really Tom Brady against those guys, though. It's Tom Brady at a round that's going a couple rounds ahead of these guys, or do you get the better wide receiver there and then hook it back with a quarterback like your Burrow, your Stafford, even your Jimmy G, guys that could have a higher ceiling than Brady? And it's tough, Josh. If you're in your leagues that reward not throwing interceptions, I get it, but I just don't see the ceiling here for Brady.
Just excited to see Scotty Miller have a hype train heading into the 2021 season as well. You mentioned Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn. Pat and I actually discussed that backfield in the previous podcast before this one. Go and check that one out. We talked about our favorite and least favorite picks in each and every round. Keyshawn Vaughn right now is going in the 6th round. You can decide which side you think that one landed on, favorite or least favorite. And if you're checking us out on YouTube, go and subscribe to the Rotoworld Football Podcast on any of your podcast feeds and share it with one friend. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's move on. I'll go and stick with wide receiver here and go with another second-year player. Wide receiver 20, 53 overall. His name is DK Metcalf. 100 targets during his rookie season, 58 receptions, 900 yards, and 7 touchdowns. It's kind of a shock, but Metcalf's 100 targets led all wide receivers last year, and he was just second in air yards just behind Terry McLaurin. I do think that, I don't know where I stand on this one, right? Because the talent that DK Metcalf is almost unparalleled across the NFL. Yet he had some areas where he was weak in and just wasn't perfect in. And so that's why he was used like that early in his rookie season, just stuck on the left side of the formation, running a lot of vertical routes, slants. The slot fades were crazy productive. But then as the season went along, they started using him on over routes, things across the formation, even receptions on the right side of the field. crazy, crazy stuff. But what leads me to believe, and this is a storyline for a lot of players, that we can actually buy into what he did in the final portion of the season, namely his playoff performance of 2 games, 14 targets, 11 receptions, 219 yards, and a touchdown, is, Ian, we saw that progression. We saw that development, right? So if we're getting end of season DK Metcalf immediately at the start of his second season, then very rare and maybe special things can happen for the wide receiver 20.
Yeah, I know we give Brian Schottenheimer and the Seahawks offense a ton of crap, and deservedly so. You have one of the most efficient quarterbacks ever, and all you want to do is run the ball all the time. But as you said, Josh, I mean, the usage of Metcalf not only got better as the year went on, but I mean, you could just see it with Rush just more and more comfortable tossing the ball up to the guy in contested coverage almost whenever he wanted to. I mean, just consider this. It took Doug Baldwin 4 years with Russ before he got triple-digit targets in the season. It took Lockett 5. DK Metcalf got that as a rookie. They only brought in Philip Dorsett to just be a clear-out wide receiver 3. He might not even beat out David Moore for that job. You know, we got Greg Olsen there now, but even though it's a run-first offense in Seattle, you look across the league, there are not many more situations that have a more well-defined top 2 options in the passing game. Probably going to end up, again, as one of the most rush-heavy teams in the league, and that sucks because I think Lockett, Metcalf, and Russ, you know, would have very, very high wide receiver 1 and QB1 ceilings. But even without that, great player, worst case, number 2 option. I'd predict he actually gets more targets than Lockett this season. And yeah, he came out at the end of the season. Sign me all the way up for DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I think at worst, you're going to get a boom bust wide receiver 3 every single week. He's just going to be one of the most efficient targets over these next couple of years. Not only is Russell Wilson just like the most efficient player in the entire NFL, where Metcalf is targeted is also where the most fantasy production comes from. It's the 25 to 50 air yards downfield. That's where the highest PPR points per target is. And that's where Metcalf runs a lot of his routes. So you're at least going to get a highly efficient player. And if he takes on a little more of that target share, a little more of the air yard share, he was at 19% and 26% last year. I mean, we can be looking at like wide receiver 1 fantasy numbers. Just, you know, you're going to get the efficiency, and there's room for growth as the targets keep rolling on.
Okay, we said a lot of positive things, so I think it's only fair to bring up some skepticism here, right? Okay, 6.3 targets per game last year, just 6.3 targets, 3.6 receptions per game last season. And Hayden, in between moving boxes up 4 flights of stairs this past weekend, you also tweeted about not talking about total fantasy points for a season, but instead average fantasy points per game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe DK Metcalf was wide receiver 46 based on average fantasy points per game. Does that not give you any pause?
It certainly does. I've seen studies where if you're looking at rookie wide receivers, as long as they meet a threshold for targets and they're highly efficient, their year 2 jump is just massive. And over the last 5 years, the consensus ADP just has not been high enough on these highly efficient rookies. And DK Metcalf certainly fits that build. And like you said, he was progressing as the season went on. And I don't think that there's enough other people on the Seahawks that are going to be stealing away too much of the target share. He was only at 19% last year. If that goes up to 23, 24, 25%, man, he's going to be balling.
And Ian, isn't it close to the conversation that we have with AJ Brown as well? You know, this run first offense that doesn't have tremendous passing volume in totality. But the difference here, Ian, is that it's 6 spots different, right? Like, AJ Brown is the wide receiver 14 in drafts right now. DK Metcalf is the wide receiver 20. So while I don't love right now where AJ Brown is going in drafts, I would feel much more comfortable taking DK Metcalf on where he's lining up right now.
Yeah, and even if Metcalf doesn't have that, you know, overall just clear-cut alpha pass game option in his range of outcomes, like your DJ Charks, your Terry McLaurins, your Devontae Parkers, I mean, that's pretty much what we're giving up in order just to have someone associated as a top 2 pass catcher for Russell Wilson. So as Hayden was saying, I mean, Russ is just so good that our floor for Metcalf, even if, you know, his per game average as rookie wasn't great, the floor is still firmly in wide receiver 3 range with, you know, the potential for so much more.
And it's a better quarterback than Russell Wilson compared to Ryan Tannehill, plus it's about 5 more pass attempts per game. I mean, Tennessee was last in the league last year in average pass attempts per game with 27, I believe.
Sheesh.
By the way, the other part of this exercise that was so much fun was just watching some of these highlight reels prior to this, just to get and reimagine what it was like to see these players in their first year. What DK Metcalf does on the field just to make everyone look small. And more importantly, like Seattle and Brian Schottenheimer, we give him grief, but he matched up DK Metcalf consistently against these smaller, shiftier slot receivers. Once you get DK moving and then the ball in his hands, he's just throwing those smaller cornerbacks to the ground, like trying to be tackled by 3 or 4 guys out of bounds, and he's the one who's still standing up at the end of it. A rare player that I'm so pumped to see what happens as we progress here into year 2.
Yeah, and I get kind of annoyed at our industry's general haterness towards contested catch specialists like Metcalf, just other random players. I'll throw Auden Tate out there. Just, even if they don't consistently break away 5 yards from the dudes, guess what? There's not many 6'3" plus guys that can go up and get a ball when everything's not, we see this in the NBA. It's great when you shoot all these threes and stuff, but guess what? There's going to be a time when, it comes on in that one-on-one situation, you're getting locked up, and, you need good offense to beat good defense. So yeah, I get it. It's easier to throw a guy that's wide open versus, throw a guy open and all that. But, relax a little bit, everyone. I see people tossing out these next-gen separation stats. I'm not saying there's not a great way to measure this. And, I'd love to see like a gravity-esque score for like wide receivers, seeing how much like coverage gets moved toward them. But right now, like the best separation stats we have had Jimmy Graham as the league's leader in separation last year. So let's all chill out a little bit on the contested catch artists out there.
And it helps out Russell Wilson, right? Like Russell Wilson trusts his wide receivers, and like those deep play action fakes that he would make, that he just lob it up to Metcalf along the sideline and just trust him to win. Oh, it's beauty. It's art, some might say. Okay, let's close out. One more name, Hayden Winks. Who are you nominating?
I am out on any David Johnson post hype. I can't do it with him. Last year he was just too bad, and for me it's the fit within the Texans offense. Deshaun Watson targeted his running backs on only 14.7 of his throws last year. That was a 3rd lowest rate in the NFL, and that's for a couple of reasons. Deshaun Watson loves to scramble, of course. He's one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in the league, but he's also one of the most aggressive quarterbacks in the league. The Texans were 6th in percentage of passes traveling 20-plus yards downfield, so he's never checking the ball down. So what David Johnson was so good at with the Cardinals back in the day was catching those dump-offs and then breaking them upfield. I'm not sure if we're going to get that with David Johnson. It just goes to show you over the last 4 years, this is where the Texans running backs ranked in PPR points. They were 26th last year, 30th, 25th, and then 27th. And I don't think that David Johnson has enough left in the tank. And even if he did show it, the re-injury risk is so high that I just want to be out on the whole situation.
Yeah, last year really wasn't quite as bad as, the run he had against the Buccaneers, where it looked like he had a piano on his back, made it out to be. I mean, before he got those back and ankle injuries, only McCaffrey, Cook, Eckler, and Chubb had more points per reception than DJ. But, I mean, so much of that was just coming from as a receiver. And, maybe the Texans do just change their offensive philosophy. They're going to have to do something without Hopkins soaking up 160-plus targets. And, David's kind of rate in the slot and out wide was similar to what we saw Duke Johnson last year. So, I mean, Bill O'Brien's not completely immune to, using his running backs in the pass game, but we are making several kind of leaps of faith for a guy that, as Hayden mentioned, does have a very, very troubling injury history. And, it does suck that we did not see him return to form in any, manner after that injury. I mean, I don't like to look at players and rule them out only because you're saying, well, he'll probably get injured, but it's not looking good for DJ in that manner. And also the projected fit in the offense could also be troublesome. So I'm more in the Texans offense. I like the wide receivers because you can get them in the 30s and 40s range, and they have that upside. David, maybe a little earlier in this offseason when he was kind of going as almost later and, past even like David Montgomery. But no, I'm not going to use anything resembling a top 20 pick on him this year.
We talk about it all the time. It's just another example, and just a crazy example, of how quickly these running back careers just fall off a cliff. I mean, 2 years ago, David Johnson was a top 3 running back in fantasy circles, was one of the most electric running backs in the entire NFL, maybe the best receiving back in the NFL in terms of what he could do. I mean, I remember those, was it the Carson Palmer days where, they would basically run like 4 verts and have him as like a clear out option underneath. And it was like 3rd and 16, and he would just pick it up. He's just one of the most athletic runners in the league. And I would say, and again, I'm no coach, but for a long time, he kind of relied on that athleticism as a runner. And if he just doesn't have that anymore, if that's been sapped from him now, and you also talked about potentially the lack of receiving volume connected to Deshaun Watson, then it's troubling. But guys, we're not talking about, a top 3, top 5 running back here. We're talking about the running back 22 in drafts right now. I mean, he's the running back 18 in our magazine. And by the way, Hayden, you and I have him the latest at running back 23 and 24. But it's difficult for me. One of those running backs in that area is going to hit. And we talked about this with Pat last week as well. Your Melvin Gordons, your James Connors, your Devin Singletaries, your David Montgomerys, like one of those is going to hit. I could live in a universe where it might be David Johnson, but I totally understand the skepticism as well.
Yeah, I looked at historical ADPs and tried to figure out where the most profitable picks are by position in which areas. And one of the takeaways from that article was the RB 15 to 24 range has just been atrocious. And that's the same range where the wide receivers have the highest win rate. If you look at rounds 3 through 6, the win rate of wide receivers is 8.9%, and the average win rate is 8.3%. It seems small, but it's actually a big deal. In that range, you want to be drafting your receivers, like the guys we talked about, Metcalf, and going on from there, and not your David Johnsons. For me, I want to start early with my running backs, get those out of the way, and then wait a while longer, grab someone like Tevin Coleman, or even wait later, get someone like Chase Edmonds or Tony Pollard, one of these handcuff guys, and just skip out on this entire tier completely.
So, guys, if we're saying David Johnson, injury risk's a real thing. All right. Is this the year with Duke Johnson?
Duke Johnson is better than David Johnson, and it's not even close. That's my take.
That is a fact. And Duke Johnson has never missed a game in his 4-year career. He was more efficient running inside than Carlos Hyde was last year. We know he's a great receiver. Hugh Jackson and Bill O'Brien, I don't think get the most flattering things said about them, but they've told the world that the, Miami Hurricanes all-time leading rusher is, not a 3-down back. Do we see it this year? I'm just nervous that even if David Johnson gets hurt, we see them bring in, Devontae Freeman or something like that. Josh, thoughts?
Just would not be an appearance from Ian Hartitz if Duke Johnson was not mentioned. It's only fitting here. Ian Hartitz. Okay, here are the 6 names we discussed today that are hype training their way through the NFL off season. Calvin Ridley, Mecole Hardman, Tyler Higbee. All 3 of us are on board. The Bucs offense, Ian Hartitz, not so much. DK Metcalf, yeah, I think we can agree. Exciting player. And then finally, David Johnson, plenty of skepticism to be had. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen? You think we did well? I think this was a great podcast.
You didn't answer my question, Josh. Do you think if David goes down, Duke is able to
wrap this up?
There's a reason, I have learned that as the host, I get to decide when we move on from topics and when there's potential for people to listen back to this and, clip or quote me on certain players. And I don't want them to. And Duke Johnson, I can say that I think he's an awesome talent. And I think that if anyone knows that Deshaun Watson doesn't necessarily throw to running backs as much as we would like him to, or could be as efficient, Duke Johnson probably knows that more than anyone else in the NFL. So, and the only point that I'll make closing here with David Johnson, and I made this with Pat in the last episode. If he just does what Carlos Hyde did last year, isn't that value, Hayden? Isn't that value? Like over 1,000 yards, a super quiet 1,000-yard season. And David Johnson, I think, despite the concern, isn't he more talented than Carlos Hyde is right now?
Possibly. My whole thing with those type of players is if you're looking at who won your fantasy league, were they starting Carlos Hyde?
No, they were not.
No.
They were starting Lamar Jackson.
Yes, they were. Like you need like total upside guys. And I don't think that this offense, just the way that they use running backs, even if Duke Johnson was a full-time player, just the ceiling's just not quite there. And I know like if you're drafting the RB 40, of course, it's going to be tough to find the ceiling. But for me, give me like Chase Edmonds, someone that if he's actually starting, the offense is so conducive of fantasy points that you're going to get a higher chance of getting an RB1. And I just don't see it with the David Johnson, Duke Johnsons in this offense with Deshaun.
My last thought is I got Sheffield United over Aston Villa.
No. I was gonna bring it up here at the end, Ian. Just your thoughts, your feelings on while people are listening to this podcast, the Premier League season. 10 games left for the Villa boys from Aston to stay up, to not get relegated, to keep their wonder kid in Jack Grealish, the homegrown man from Birmingham. But if they go down, and almost if they stay up, then he will most likely be gone as well. I know you'll be watching, Ian Hartitz. It is the kickoff match. Did you know that? They are starting with the best, the number one show. No Wolf tickets here, Ian. It's Aston Villa and Sheffield United.
No Wolf tickets here.
I've never watched a Premier League soccer game in my entire life. Not a single one.
Start on Wednesday. 1 p.m. Eastern. All right. That's going to do it for us. Again, if you are not subscribed and you enjoy the show, go and do that. Like, share, do all that fun stuff. For Ian Hartitz, for Hayden Winks and his Restoration Hardware photo shoot, I am Josh Norris, more than ever, up the Villa. We'll talk to you all soon. See ya.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.